So arrays, again, they kind of follow a similar syntax as just making like a normal variable where you'll go your type, and then you add these like brackets here. That's how it knows that it's going to be an array. Then you give it a name, and then there's two things that you can do. You can either like give it all the things that are going to be in the array, like doing it this way, which is basically what we're doing like down here, is that we're creating an array with already things inside of it. So you can do it this way, or probably the way you guys have been doing it more often is the other way, where you say like, your type brackets name equals new type, and then you give it like how many indexes they're going to be. So what that does is it just creates an empty array of, in this case, size 5. So there's two ways you can do it. You can do it like one of these ways, where you actually put everything inside of it already, or you can just create an empty one of a certain size. So we're going to talk about what this does. I don't know if any of you have run into this situation where you set one array equal to another array, and it's giving you some weird things kept happening. So we'll talk about that briefly, but you don't need to really understand it that much. I'll just tell you kind of the rough idea why it's not a good thing to do that. So before we get to that, any questions on just the basic setup of making an array? So what this does is it will just make an empty array. Well, it's technically not empty, because what it'll do is it'll throw in the default value for whatever type you have. So for integer, the default value is 0. So it'll make an array like an array of 5 zeros. So if I set like for string, if I did the same thing with string, well, the default string is just like an empty string, which doesn't even have a space in it. It's just like this is the empty string. There's no space or anything in it. It's just like the open quotes and then the close quotes. Same thing with character. It's just like nothing in it. So if you do it this way, it will make an array of size 5 and then just throw all the default values in there. And then, if we want to, I think, do we end up talking about that? Hold on, let me go a couple slides. Okay, yeah, we do. Okay. So before we go through like indexing an array, I want to talk about what this is doing. So I'm setting two arrays equal to each other. So the common misconception is that if I have two arrays, like let's say I have one integer array called like, it has like 1, 2, 3, 4 in it. And let's say that one is R1. Say R1 equals that. And then we make another array and we say R2 equals, and then let's say, like 5, 6, 7, 8. If I say R1 or R2 equals R1, what a lot of people think it does, and it will look like it does this, is that people think that it fills this array with the same elements of R1. But actually what it does is that instead of R2 referencing a new array, it will make it reference this array as well. I know that sounds weird, but I'll show you an example in the next slide. So that's called aliases. And aliases, as you guys heard before, is just it's like the English word alias, which is basically two different names for the same thing. So what happens when you set two arrays equal to each other is that they're talking about the exact same array. So if I change like one array, it changes both the arrays. So if I say like array 1 equals array 2, and then I change like a certain value in array 1, like array 1 at index 2 equals something, then it will change this, it will change that index for array 2 as well, which in a lot of cases you don't, you don't want to be doing that. You want to be changing just one and not both of them. So that's why it's not really good to set two arrays equal to each other. If you want one array to hold the same elements as a different array, you would create a new separate array and then like for loop through this one and put them all into this one. So you would put it in individually rather than just setting two arrays equal to each other. Because if you do that, then they will be, when you change one, it'll change both of them, which is typically not what you want to do. And then this block of code right here is basically just showing that, because it's using the previous code before. That's just, it was assuming that we're basically saying that array int2 equals array int. So again, they'll both be this. And then if we go back to this code right here, then if we see that right here, we're changing index 3 of array into 1. But if you ran this code down here, where we never did anything with array int 2, we never changed it, but it will change it in the output. So it changed index 3 of array int 2 to 1 as well, because they're both talking about the same array instead of two equivalent arrays. So if you set two arrays equal to each other, when you change one, it changes both. That's basically the idea I want to get across. So most of the time you don't want to do that. So if you want one array to have the same values as a different array, you would just create a new array and then basically for loop through the first array and put the numbers manually into the other array. It's kind of tedious, but you got to do what you got to do. So we're going to talk about traversing through the array, and then we don't have too much left. Yeah. So we're going to make it on time. I know we're going to go a little bit over, but then I'll still have time for the Q&A. I'll still be around for that. So we only have like 2 more slides. So traversing through an array, we know that typically, so this is where like the for loop comes in handy, is because we kind of know exactly how many times we want to go, we want to loop through it. Because like if this, like in this case, the array is of size 5. So if I want to print everything in the array, you know, I care about how many times I'm looping through it. Like I want it to loop 5 times. So that's why like a for loop is typically better to iterate through an array rather than like a while loop. So the for loop here is, and keep in mind, arrays start at index 0. So if I have like the array, you know, in this array, like 6, actually, I'll just use the 1. So, so even though this has 5 elements in it, they're indexed starting at 0. So it goes index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I wanted to get like the 6, instead of doing like array at like 1, I have to do array at 0. Because it starts at index 0 and goes up to index 4. So that's why if you ever noticed, if I wanted to get like the last index of an array, I would have to do like my array.length -1. That will be the index of the last number. Because like in this case, array.length returns how many elements are in the array, so 5. But if I try to index at 5 in this case, there is no 5th index. Because remember, it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. This will give me an error. So if I say, so remember, r.length is equal to 5. So if I try to index at 5, there is no index 5. So you'll see that error that's like index out of bounds. So that's why if I want to get the last index, I would do r.length -1. And that will give me index 4, which is the index of the last thing in the array. So yeah, so a for loop is the best way to go through it because we care about how many times you want to go through it. So you would start at 0. If you want to go through it from like left to right, you would start at 0. Basically say while I is less than, if you know exactly how many things are in the array, you can just say like less than that number, or you can say like while I is less than int array.length. That works as well. And then if you want to go one by one, just do I++. And then how we index it, like how we talk about the actual number at that index, we have to do it this way. So we say our array name. So in this case, it's called int array. And then we do those brackets. And then in the brackets is like what index we want to get. So in this case, we're doing I. So I starts at 0 and then goes to 1, 2, 3, and 4. So when I is 0, it'll print out the number 6 because that's at index 0. When I is at 1, we'll print out index 1, which is 7. And then, you know, at index 2 is the number 2, and so on. So that's basically how you just traverse through an array. So for loop, starting at 0, going into like I is less than the length. Because sometimes what I see people do is that they say like I is less than int array.length -1. Well, because what you're saying in that case is, so int array.length is 5. So if I say I is less than int array.length, that is basically saying while I is less than 5, which is fine. But if I say .length -1, that means while I is less than 4. So what would happen is when it gets to, because the last index is at 4. So you can think of, if I say r.length -1 here, it's basically saying, well, I is less than 4. It wouldn't print out this one at all because it would stop when I is equal to 4. which is at this last index. So that's why if you're going to do it the r.length minus way, don't do r.length minus 1 unless unless you do like I is less than or equal to r.length minus 1, you could do that. But if you're using strictly less than, then you have to do just r.length.